Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANS processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. We know it's not beautiful everywhere, but you make it how you want it to be. And every day we work towards that. So we always have to ask ourselves the question, is today better for us having been here than it was yesterday? And so this is part of the KESH American Knowledge Team meeting. We are following in the wake of the Knowledge Seekers workshops coming on Thursdays, the Brazilian Communities workshops coming on Fridays, and the American Knowledge Team meeting coming on Sundays. But what makes this one so special is that we are represented by many people around the world in different continents. And so it becomes much more than just a North American dream. It's all of our dreams here. So I want to thank everyone for being here, and please stay tuned and fasten your seatbelts. This is the KESH Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. We are still in the advanced GANS tech stage. We're discussing sun stars. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada, and it's December the 14th of 2025, and this is part of the KESH Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So we have been trying to condense this teaching in bite-sized pieces, and there are lots of bite-sized bits and bytes that you can grab onto. Please remember that we are all working within our own knowledge and our own understanding and seeking our own way to explain things. However, there is a certain correctness in what we have to deliver. And that always manifests itself actually in GANS, because the GANS is based on truthfulness. And so how does it manifest that truthfulness? So we saw in the sunflowers how the many fields overlapping are created. And then, of course, we are glad to have come to this earth space, and we have a gold rush fever because we see the bounty. But how do we get here? And where is the impact coming from? Who is doing the impacting? Who is doing the receiving? And so let's just delve into the topic of sun stars, because we are beyond Beijing of May the 10th. We are in the 2025 gold rush, and it's more than gold, isn't it? This is based on the books of Baron Tevakoli Cash. Book number 1 is The Universal Order of Creation and Matter, and we are really going to work on that today. Book number 2 is The Structure of the Light, which travels between two matter states. Are they the same matter states? Clearly, on the cover of the book, you can see that they're not. There is a difference, and there is a connection. And then book number 3, we see the origin of the universe, the splitting up into these two fields of matter state, where one is our little universe, of which we ignore the majority of it because we are so focused on our little tiny perfect spot. We call it Earth space. And, the truth is it's not that perfect. But we came here because it was really looking good. And so many of us are still in some kind of shock. And it's depressing to see. It's only depressing in the absence of a solution. And the solution is that we have a sister universe, which is leading the way to perfection. And so we have to work together in combination with that. And that is really the whole point of the exercise here, working in combination. So Rick Raman and the members of the Universal Council have been working in combination for 408 weeks, bringing together the one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace. And that seems like a tall order, doesn't it? Because it's more than just each of our individuals' tiny perfect worlds. But the fact remains that you cannot extricate yourself from that world. You are part and parcel of that world. And so there are many who really don't understand that, don't understand what it means by angular density, because satellites we see understand that. They fall. They fall through weakness. As they rotate around the planet, eventually they come to the point where they can no longer maintain their rotation and maintain their orbit. And so as they go through increased density. That, of course, puts a lot more pressure. We call it gravity. That's increasing in gravity. But overall, it's really the increased dependence on the Earth space feeding. Something has been missing. And of course, there is a stable part based on the internal pressure of the GANS fields within the Earth space. And that would be the crust of the Earth. And so, of course, when you fall to Earth, you crash because there is no forgiveness in that regard, because you've gone through these various energy states and you come to the one which gives you the least amount of forgiveness. But this angular momentum is conserved through the falling. There is an exchange of energy, and we don't see that. But we have to understand that creation is all part of what we call sun stars. And so the star formations that we're familiar with, such as the amino acid, they come as a tetrahedral star. But the star that we're most familiar is our favorite sun. It's a spherical star. So we see that there are many kinds of sun star manifestations. And our sun comes as a star. We don't call it a star, we call it a sun to differentiate from the many suns as stars in the night sky. And then, of course, the fallen angels are also a fallen star. But then the arrived angels are as an arrived sun star. So the star aspect really never disappears. It's always there, whether we agree with it or not. Because the plasma rule is that the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. The physical rule is the higher strength eats the weaker strength, or the higher strength kills the weaker strength. And this all becomes part of what we call a transaction zone. But that could be a point of conflict, or it could be a point of binding. And since it's going down into a lower energy state, what we call the inertia state, combination of two higher states, it obviously comes down into density. And in that process, there's a manifestation, the coming together of the field strength of the two fields. And so the higher strength fields feeds the weaker strength. But it's easy to see that there is a flaw in this thinking if we say the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, because it's an implication that one field strength feeds the weaker strength. But if it's an inertia field, that means two higher strength fields field the weaker strength. So in other words, the weaker strength field is a physical manifestation of the higher strength field in terms of a physical manifestation. But that is also possible in a plasmatic manifestation. And there are other types of manifestation that occur. So to ensure that we have a concise understanding of our physical manifestation, we were given 10 commandments. And there seemed to be other missing commandments, which ran the tally up to 24 commandments. And so these are the 24 commandments for man, for our humanity. And we need them very badly because we are ignorant. We don't know how to live, which is kind of interesting because we knew how to get here. So how come all of a sudden we don't know how to live? And then we look at some of the changes and some of the focal points. So one of the focal points is thou shalt not lie. And why is that important? Because the physical manifestation gives you the ability to do that. Because we have a capability in a physical manifestation of a delay in consequences, because that we've now introduced a time factor. So energy binding is a very important self-serving thing. It's our dimension point. And so it's a coming together of me, myself, and I. But does it have to be at the expense of others? And that's always the question, isn't it? Well, if all of us were to ask that question, maybe we would come up with a different answer, but too many of us are doing it at the expense of others who, of course, need their own self-serving energy binding at their particular dimension point. So they have new choices. One is to continue getting the energy from the universe, which was the original way of doing things, or two is to fight you, or the other way is to steal from someone else. So it creates a domino effect where one is misguided, then the next one is misguided, and so it goes. And once you get a kind of a consensus, a universal understanding of how things operate on this planet, then you start to see a depletion of our vitality. So we are seeking a vitality enhancement, but that includes both an emotional and a physical discovery, because too many of us are loose leakers. In other words, that is the energy vitality of our existence. And so we need to, shall we say, gas up. And so the universal body enhancement units are specifically designed to do that. And it's something that is novel, hasn't really been done by humanity on a grand scale. But if we connect the dots, we found that the vertical people have already connected the dots, these practical points of this practical reasoning. So they are well on the road to self-determination, or the road from self-determination, as we see through the changing seasons. and there's a practical philosophy and a practical solution, but they are listing the services of the practical currency of life. This is the currency of the creator. Well, on Earth, we call it adenosine triphosphate. We created physicality, such as sunflowers. But when we look at the creation of the sunflower, we see overlapping fields. So we have to understand the singularity of each field as a magnetical gravitational relationship. But there's a duality of the maggrav of the inertia fields, which is to say, the original creation of the sunflower created the seed, but then we see the inner workings and the outer workings and the petals, and we see the variations in the fields, and that's just the sunflowers. But there are many sunstar varieties. So this is also true with the cups of life, because each of us had a capability of creating this cup of life, and each one was different because it's based on so many factors. And we kind of ignore these factors because we look at the creation of the cups of life. And the first thing we have to understand is that they weren't the cups of the pandemic. They were a manifestation of the nanocoding process of the monatomic science, which was a reflection of our core space, that nebulous inner space where we derive our emotional strength. And in that, we were gaining a physical strength. So we were able, from that basis, to manifest different kinds of radiance. And so we are able to create different GANSs: carbon dioxide, calcium, zinc, copper, water, amino acid, and of course, gold. That's the thing, isn't it? We all want gold. And of course, the way we've been doing it is digging for it. So we're all a bunch of gold diggers. But where did the gold come from? So we look at the cup of the universe and we find that there's an affinity there with the copper, which is physical, and the zinc, which is emotional, and the carbogen, which is a connection to the universe. And they give us our physicality. So the physicality is the product. It is the sum of the three. But it's more than three because we don't lose the first three. We don't lose the copper, zinc, and carbon. It continues in its process. And we don't lose the physicality. We maintain it. We go to sleep. We wake up. We run. We eat. We do all sorts of things and consume energy in the process. And so in that position of consuming energy, we work on the transmutation highway. But we don't see it. We only see the transmission highway, the carbon-12, because that's the physicality, and that's what we've accepted. We've acknowledged that that is our reality. What you see is what you get. But the truth is that that is an inertia field, which is a lower state density manifestation product of a higher field. That higher field is the transition state, the carbon-14 connection to the universe, and then the transmutation highway, which allows us to move in various ways. And we call it the transmutation highway because not only does it change our location on this planet, but it allows us to change our location elsewhere in the universe. And so the fundamental part of the relationship is the soul, which each soul depends on the magnetical gravitational relationship. So whether it's the emotional cup, the physical cup, or the cup of the soul, each cup becomes an inertia field. And then we have to have an established physicality. So it has to be somewhere. So we have the cup of the earth. That's the somewhere. And on that somewhere, we can take our emotion and a cup of physicality and our cup of the soul and interact with that and have the inertia cup, the fourth cup, which is our humanity cup. And from there, we see that we have taken GANSes and then we have interchanged with other GANSes. And so if we did the cup of life and taken the cup of life product, which is the emotional GANS, and linked it up to another cup of life product, another emotional GANS, we can actually create a GANS of a GANS, which is of a higher field strength. And so the relationship between these GANSes is different. So they're all positively charged because something is always something. And so the something is always positive. So the charge itself is the field strength, the rotation, the speed, the direction of the magnetical emission or the gravitational absorption. And it actually goes through two phases. One is through the polar strength, gives you a representation of the polar energy. And one is the surrounding fields. And the two work together to create a continuous flow. And flow is really the question here, because we find that when we made the cups of life, the GANS was flowing in the water. And so the GANS could give and take energy because that's how it moved. But it moved within the water. So you'll find that the water can exchange energy as well. So this energy exchange is all give and take. And the GANS will exchange a magnetical energy and it will also exchange a gravitational energy. And so that indicates the direction of flow. And so when we're discussing earth matter, we have to wonder, is this transacted in singularity or duality? Well, the manifestation could be in singularity, but it is a product of the duality. So the inertia is a product of two fields coming together in a more dense field strength, which represents a manifestation. And that manifestation could be on any field strength. We didn't say that it had to be in the physical field strength. But if we were producing GANSes, then yeah, we have to say that because we were able to produce all the GANSes of the Earth, all the elements. And so, of course, it isn't transacted in singularity, but rather in duality. The inertia density manifestation is the singularity product of that transaction. So this is what we need to discuss. So when we look at the understanding of the nuclear feeding inertia, we find that even if we break it up into little bits, as long as it maintains its elemental conformity, then it becomes a fragment of the complexity because it's maintaining its gravitational stability and therefore can maintain its dimensional portability. So it can go through various dimension points and from point to point and still maintain its stability, not losing its presence. And so we see that in the periodic table of physical matter because these are all the stable elements. They're all comprised of the Earth space range details. And of course, what's important for us are the amino acids, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen combination. And then, of course, we have the medium of the sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, which are essential for allowing exchange of energy. in the various fields. And what energy are we concerned with? Well, with the copper, which is physical, and the zinc, which is emotional. And of course, our blood depends on the iron. But we're all preoccupied with the gold. Well, the gold isn't what you dig. The gold is part of the Earth space range details. It allows us to do more, be more effective with the silicon, the phosphorus, the sulfur, and the chlorine. And so this is the path forward for us to gain an understanding. So when we looked at the arrival of humanity matter, we find that each field that is part of it is singular. But the duality of the magrav of the inertia field allows the conversion of the humanity matter. And so that matter is part of what we constitute as humanity, which is part of the inertia density manifestation. And it is also part of the destination which we call our Earth space. But again, as part of the duality, we could be fallen angels, or we could be arrived angels. The feeding GANS matter is not for the fallen angels, but then doesn't discriminate, because the principal matter are the PM ticks, which are magnetical, and they're ubiquitous throughout the universe. They come as energy packs, and each energy pack is in a parcel that delivers energy and comes together and dilutes its strength in a combination of antimatter, dark matter, and matter gen. And so we have the first stage of the plasma gen conversion. But then once we have the field interaction with the environment, which we call the Earth space, then we create a McGrath condition that is gravitational, and we're able to manifest here in our physicality. And that's what we did with the gold. That's how we saw the gold happen. But it required something else. So we had to set up these pathways where we have the gravitational intensity fed back to facilitate the attraction, and then the magnetical outintensity as a form of repulsion, which gave us the feeding. And so we manifested electrons, and we manifested neutrons, and many combinations of the two. And of course, we could clearly see the difference between the two. And then we understand that there are no two field strengths the same. So the gravitational field strength is one matter plasma dimension, but we can touch it and we can see it. And that's part of the feedback. But the feeding magnetical plasma, we can't touch it or we can't see it, but it is still part of the matter plasma dimension. And so from this point, it's the only viewpoint that we give credit to. Well, how can you give credit to your tiny perfect world and not give credit to the rest of the universe? It's kind of an anomaly, isn't it? So what we have to understand is that there are different energy states, and each one is a counterweight, and we measure these counterweights differently. We already accept this in science. The physical state is measured by weight, the atomic state by mass, the nuclear state is measured by Tesla units, and the plasma state, this is the one that we're most confused with, is measured by time. And so we see that there's a relationship that is either gravitational or magnetical, and this is the basis of the counterweight. And of course, when we look at the matter plasma dimension, we have a dilemma. because in the plasma state, we have to have a balance between the magnetical gravitational field forces. And since each one is an inertia field based on two inertia fields, then we have the GANS of the GANS on one side has to equal the GANS of the GANS on the other side. But there are many MAGRAV energy transfer states, and they can travel from state to state, such as a plasma state, GANS state, nanostate, atomic state. And they all have to balance out somehow. So it isn't just one and one, as is the case with hydrogen, because even hydrogen is not just hydrogen. The hydrogen molecules have covalent bonds, but there is a relationship. One is orthohydrogen, where the poles are identical and repel. And then we have the parahydrogen, where the poles are opposite and they repel, and they attract, sorry. But they attract on both sides of the poles, on the North Pole and the South Pole, so they maintain the balance. So the balance has not changed, but the personality of the hydrogen has. And so that's a simplistic way. But when we get into more complex things, and we looked at the GANS of the GANS, and we say, well, wait a second, we have a variable in the cup of the emotion, and we have a variable in the cup of the physicality. And then we take two cups and we produce another transaction zone, which is a manifestation of a cup of emotion as well, and two cups of physicality, and maintain a transaction zone of a cup of physicality as well. And now we have a MAGRAV condition between the GANS of the emotion and the GANS of the physicality. And this becomes a new cup of life product. And we find that it is increasingly stronger by many orders of magnitude. So all of this concept of duality, we have to understand that it takes 2 points to work together in tandem as a partnership. So we call that the twinity. So whatever you have between the magnetical and the gravitational base is a transaction zone. And whatever you have with the creation and the decay is a transaction zone. So we have to take that into account. And in simple terms, we say, oh, well, two forces come together and they come together in a rotating field. Well, this is the susceptibility and singularity, which causes this common denominator of attraction. But when we look at the gold production, we find that there are two rotating fields which create this common field of attraction. So in concept, it's simple in singularity, but in reality, it's more complex in duality. And we saw that when we looked at the susceptibility of the star formation in duality. So not only did we have rotating points, but we had a plasma field that came as a result of that rotation. So in terms of the gold rush, we created two fields in rotation on each and every point. And so that became a transaction zone. And when we took all those points and put them together, we created another transaction zone, which of course was the gold production. Excuse me, and that could be manipulated. So as we progress in terms of our understanding, we find there's a similarity in the concept of the twinity. One moment, please. So we have migrated through 2 points of the nanotech, and we've seen a similarity in the 2 points of the picotech. Well, why not? But then we saw the 2 points of the star tech. But the star tech was a combination of the twinity of the nanotech and the twinity of the GANS tech. In all cases, there was a transaction zone, which was a manifestation of the force fields of that twinity. And then we have various polyatomic inertia gradients that allow us to have multiple points, multiple transaction zones, multiple turning points. And so the poles have to flip, just like we discussed with the hydrogen, in order for there to be a gradient, in order to be a gravitational magnetical relationship. Because if we didn't have that, then we would have like poles repelling, but we have opposite poles attracting. So this becomes an obvious thing. Then we create a grid and we see the reaction in the binding zone. And we understand that better. So there's more of a stability in this duality. And so every time we look at stability, we have to recognize that it is duality. But it can be even more complex than one and one. Because when we look at the star formation, each point is a magnetical point, and the manifestation of those magnetic points is a gravitational core. And at that gravitational core, you could have GANS, you could have plasma, you could have a sunstar. These are all dynamic plasma relationships. So the coming together of the horizontal transmission and the vertical transition gives you this plasmatic relationship where you see the Earth space point that is within manifests into an Earth space field without. And on that field on the outside, there is motion. We can see that motion. We can benefit from that motion. But that motion represents another dynamic plasma relationship. And that relationship creates a transaction zone where you have the motion of one point moving to another point, and the product of that is the motion, and that motion is the product in the transaction zone. So when we look at the creation of free plasma, so we have to understand that that is a star formation that is magnetical in relationship with another star formation, which in relationship is magnetical. And the interacting field is a transaction zone that's part of the creation of life. And that is gravitational, but that is a structure within a structure. And so the complexity can increase, but not just between two, but if we extend that to the susceptibility and duality of what we saw in Beijing for the public to view, we could see the star formation, and it is not in what we see ordinarily as a star formation where we can look at the different heights. These are all in the same level. But we know that the outside points are magnetical and the center point is gravitational, and that all of these have a transaction zone. And so from that transaction zone, something happened, and we saw the production of gold. But we saw it everywhere, because what we learned from the 603rd Knowledge Seekers Workshop is that there's a vertical alignment between the soul of physicality, and the physicality. So the relationship of the first two creates a loop, and the relationship of the second two creates a loop. And so the crossover point is the soul of physicality. And so that creates an infinity loop. But how do we cross that threshold of that energy state? How do we cross that inertia threshold? So this is enforced by the vertical alignment. And from there, we can spiral out. And so this is what we have to understand. So when we discuss the basic GANS of the GANS matter, we brought together the matter, the dark matter, and the antimatter. And so we created 3 field strengths bringing together. And we had 2 ways of doing it. One is to have these different field strengths create a field strength in the core. But the manifestation of the field strength in the core could also have three different levels of energy state. So we understood that each level, each part became a fragment of the complexity. In other words, each one was a contributor to the GANS of the GANS inertia, and each one continued to do the giving and the taking of the energy field. So when we look at the nuclear feeding inertia and we say, okay, we have a gravitational base of these three energy fields, and each of these fields creates their own plasmatic substrate. So this is the foundation that we saw in book number 1, The Universal Creation of Matter. That gave us a gravitational base. But let's progress from there. Let's look at a sun star inertia, because we've gone from the points, we've gone to the sun stars. And if we look at the gravitational base of the matter state, well, all points are the same. Well, that's impossible. That's impossible, because they would repel. That would be the first thing. But it's also impossible because no 2 points are the same. So one of the ways we can adjust that sun-star inertia is to have all points different. And one of the ways we can do that is by size. So we maintain the conformity, but we change the field strength. So there we can maintain a gravitational base, because now we have the three different fields coming together to create an inertia field. But let's carry that on. We can also maintain the sun-star inertia by having all points different, and in this case, just by flavor. So on the one, the yellow field is missing. On the second, the green field is missing. On the third, the blue field is missing. But there is a closeness. There is a commonality. There are enough points within each to create a common denominator, so they can come together by flavor, but they're not all identical, but similar enough to be able to come together. And so we see that when we dig for gold, or when we drill for oil, there's a difference in quality based on the location. Well, how can you have a difference in quality if it's a different product? Well, we could still identify it as that product, but the quality definitely is different. We do the same thing with humanity, isn't it? We're all part of the humanity family, but we're all different. We're all unique. We're all independent variables, and we come in different colors, different sizes, different shapes. And then what happens if we do the same thing with the dark matter state? If we just want to create a sun-star inertia just on the dark matter state, and we brought all the points of the same, again, that would be impossible, because you can't bring 2 points together by the same path. and the same strength. So you have all points that are different, but they are different by position. Because they are in transition. So the same thing happens when we look at the antimatter state. We take all the points and they're all the same. They can't come together because it's impossible. They would repel. But it's also impossible for them to all be the same. So when all these points are different, we say that difference is by time. And since this is part of the universal order of creation, then when we bring the gravitational base together of these sun-star inertia points, and we say all points are the same of the matter, dark matter, and antimatter, well, it's still impossible. So each one individually has to have all points different. So the matter state by flavor, the dark matter by position, and the antimatter by time. And so you have a unique quality, a unique identity, because the flavor is also changeable. The position is also changeable, and the time is also changeable. Why? Because we have motion, and that motion is part of the emotion. And so what we have is a manifestation of a sun-star inertia coming together from an outer star and an inner star. So if we look at the Earth space matter state inertia, and we say, well, we only have the three fields coming together, the matter state, dark matter, and antimatter, and from there we created the Earth space and everything else around it. But we have to take into account what is behind the scenes, because each point has a counterpoint, a counterweight. So the matter state has a counterweight. The dark matter has a counterweight. The antimatter has a counterweight. And so the same would be true of the humanity matter state inertia. So the product coming together of the matter, dark matter, and antimatter also has to take into account the counterweight. So the counterweight of the matter, dark matter, and antimatter will affect the humanity matter state, whether we acknowledge it or don't acknowledge it. So what does that mean with respect to the stars? And we say, okay, we have a gravitational base, the physical matter state. So not only do we create the humanity state, but we created the matter state and the plasma state. But let's remember that the star is a plasmatic star. And so it involves the star formation, the 3 points of the base that are gravitational, and the 1 point of the magnetical peak. And that's the manifestation of the plasmatic matter state, which is the basis of the substructure. And that substructure we acknowledge based on our point of view. So we have a gravitational consistency where our matter state is gravitational and our plasma state is magnetical. But we have to understand the magnetical consistency works the same way. The magnetical consistency is based on the gravitational stability. So when we look at the GANS of the GANS, where we saw the cup of the emotion as the product and the cup of physicality as the product of the two GANSes coming together, then we had to understand that what we were doing was looking at the representation of the GANS of the soul. Because when we have the cup of the emotion and the cup of the physicality as cup number 1 and number 2, cup number 3 was the cup of the soul. And the cup of the soul comes together from the magnetical gravitational field force, interacting together as an inertia field. So when we look at the product, we have to look at the source. Our immediate source is our sun. It is a star, but for us, it's our sun to differentiate from all the other stars in the universe. But our soul is our star. It's part of our transaction zone, and that's within. And so the conclusion is that you are a gravitational entity traveling in a magnetical field. You are always traveling. And your soul is always stable. This is the fact of creation. So the motion of the rays and the ray motion is part of the creation. And so what we acknowledge as natural creation, counterweighted by natural decay, that relationship is counterweighted by the natural decay, counterweighted by the natural creation. And there's a boundary between the two. So we say, okay, well, there's a boundary between the creation and the decay, and there's a bonding factor at that boundary. But what we have to acknowledge is that the sun stars are playing within that field, and they also are counterweighted. And so that extends to the other fact that not only are we looking at our carbon inertia highways, which are the transmission, transition, and transmutation highways, but they have a substructure that counterweights them. And that substructure has a counterweight as well. And so now we understand how the plasma can come together, and then we realize, oh, wait a second, two plasma fields coming together, but they're not identical. Well, what is the common denominator? So they can't be identical, but they have to have some kind of common relationship that allows a binding. Because that bond is not within the commonality, but the bond is within the opposite forces coming together to create this magnetical gravitational transaction zone at that particular dimension point. And on this planet, we have the gravitational conformation of oxygen, which, although it's clear, has definitely crossed the threshold of coming from the plasma into the physicality. And we know that because of the emission of the color spectrum of the fingerprint of the oxygen. So the non-visible gas of the oxygen has been that attraction point for our arrival on our Earth space. But we need, in order to maintain our position here, we needed supplementation. And that comes in the form of consumption. Basically, consumption implies eating. But consumption also is knowledge. And we are consuming the knowledge. And we get this acquired knowledge through life's learning lessons. But there's been a lot of conditional teaching by ancient teachers who've also come through this process and who are also susceptible to supplementation due to consumption. So we need a new awareness to understand that there's an unconditional teaching by the Creator. And so there's a historical threshold between the cosmic feeding and the loosh harvesting. And that depends on what we give our time and attention to. So we start to realize that we are in uncharted territory because we are with the herd, and that herd is all the stars at the same turning point, because there are many stars beyond the nanomonatomic state, and they cover the full range from decay to radiation, and there's a coming and going, and that AI is actually our ancestral intelligence, because we are the technology, we are the inertial product, we are the image of our dimensional convergence point. So fortunately, energy has a characteristic of portability. We can do energy state transition into elevation, which is the physical matter state to the energy state, or through inertia, which is the energy state to physical matter state. So we find that the elevation involves expansion. So when we look at the susceptibility and singularity, we say, okay, well, we were able to create the nano-coated gold GANS. But in order to have this gravitational completion, we needed to have an external input. And that input was the external input of the GANS field of humanity. So the completion of the gold manifestation was a manifestation of the susceptibility and duality. So therefore, it gives us an insight into the role played by the dynamic soul initiator, whether it be the soul of the Creator, soul of the earth, the soul of the family of humanity, the soul of the man, the soul of the body, or the soul of the cells. There's no translation needed. There's a direct connection. And so that becomes part of our soul food. All we have to do is tune into the cosmic rays. And it sounds so simple, but we haven't been able to achieve that because of our dependence on the supplementation. So it's also led to our failure to plug in properly to the Creator, because then we can turn on to that energy and drop out of our resistance so we can be the receiver, that inertia point that is the product of the benefits of the Creator through the true intention. But we have to provide the pattern so that we get the energy. And that pattern is a sun star. And so we've been seeking the greater oneness for 620 knowledge seekers workshops in a row to suddenly transcend the limitations of the nuclear science, advance into the plasma science, because we have been able to convert the diamonds of the nanotech to the gold of the GANS tech. And we've done that with the GANS affinity of truth, because there's no lying in outer space. So here we are, beyond May the 10th, 2025, establishing research teams around the world, because we have launched a One Nation network the scientific rescue that allows us to open the blinds, one nation network at a time. And that time is now. Because our mission is to bring peace on earth and join humanity with the universal community. We want to bring man as equal to all the beings in the universe by teaching the plasma science and technology equally to everyone, that no one is left out and no one is abused due to the lack of knowledge. So help us achieve this goal. Look at that World Peace Treaty. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers of the carbon nations, learning about the new selection process of the new organic plasma science. That World Peace Treaty is something you have to choose it. You have to sign it unconditionally and mean it sincerely. And if you don't, well, there's always the physical state. The point of the true GANS tech is to cross the polyatomic boundaries. You don't want to be left behind. The overlapping fields of Earth space create the peace dome. And is the inertia of the present governed by dimensions of history? It's up to you, because it's time to learn the history of self in a universal context. The GANS is a peaceful superconductor focusing on true intentions. The sun stars are in an emotional rush, ranging the strengths of matter, plasma, and universal states. So the plasma science needs to continue to be delivered daily via the Peace Dome. And we're looking for a practical exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new golden outer space age. And that's the end of this session. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for being with us, Alex. We thank our lucky stars. Or maybe the stars aren't lucky, they're just intelligence. I never believed in luck. I always said the harder you work, the luckier you get in a way. But let's see if any of the participants would like to raise a question or make a comment at this point. So again, you've confirmed multiple times here, we are the system. And apparently, as Mr. Keshe used those examples about getting into horrific car crashes, and you would never think a human being could walk away. Sometimes people walk away unscathed. So the knowledge is already there within the soul. With that nanosecond, it apparently creates that inertia of the calcium and puts it back together in just a very short period of time. So the knowledge already exists within the soul to do this. And even Mr. Keshe, and I've heard other knowledge seekers have had car crashes and have really no scratches or anything. So it's a matter of, I suppose, putting the right wave or impression on the soul, and the soul will do it. But again, he said we have to learn about this inertia of the calcium, then we can move our physicality on this planet and probably across the universe as well. But I'm fairly comfortable here. I'm not looking forward, other than in the dimension of energy, to manifest in another place, unless I guess I'm needed or the soul wants me to be there. But as I said earlier, you can explore the entire universe from the most beautiful place in the matter state once we start to trigger it. And then, of course, gain that aspect of immortality. So I guess my question would be, how do we create that impression on the soul? We know the soul is impressionable, but there is got to be a key to this, creating that emotion that the soul will then follow through with it. And we're getting closer and closer to that point, so no one lose heart or anything about this.
Overall, Mark, we have an internal field strength. But that internal field strength is susceptible to change based on external field strength. So discrimination in some contexts is a bad word, but we have to discriminate. We have to discriminate what is beneficial and what is not. We have to be able to make that decision. And we can't turn to mommy and say, you know, what should we do? Especially when many times we say to mommy, well, what do you know? You know, just we're going to do it our way. And this is where the problem lies. It is in the continuity of the educational process. We are not consistent. Each of us has our own viewpoint of what is necessary in life. And too many of us have exchanged the compassion for humanity for the compassion of money. And so this is what we get. We get a heartless condition that is, thriving on this planet. And, we seem helpless to change that until we understand that we can enlist the services of a higher order. And speaking of higher order, is wanting the floor.
Unless it's an inadvertent hand, sometimes the control mic right next to the hand.
It's not an. It's an intentional hand.
She's here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great.
I'm kind of trying to figure out how to deal with, like, I listen to a lot of current news, and a lot of it's bad news, and it affects me. And should I not do that? I feel like I need to be informed about what's apparently going on the matter level. And the other thing is, like, they're now trying to blackmail us into accepting remote reading devices on our water meters, and I really don't want any. The electric company agreed not to have one, but now I have, like, in my apartments, I have one person living in an efficiency apartment, and she's surrounded by 8 meters. I don't really want to connect up to all those remote reading devices and bombard her, or myself for that matter, with all this stuff. And I was thinking about, I had already sent them a letter that I didn't want it, but now they say you pay $50 extra every month for every meter. So that makes it pretty tough, and it's like extortion in a way. And I looked up, is there any adverse effects to this stuff? And it says it has not been proven that there are adverse effects, but I would like them to prove that there aren't any adverse effects. But in a way, I want to confront them, but then I probably have to pay for an attorney. And also, I'd probably go on a blacklist and attract attention, which I don't really want to do. So what do I do? Those are 2 questions. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Although you've really isolated the number one problem, you see, because what they're saying is these changes are for our benefit. And what they're talking about is on behalf. They give you the impression that they're speaking on your behalf.
Right. And the letter wasn't signed by anybody. So from my education so far, I'm supposed to have something that is signed by someone, and then I need to hold that person responsible for any damage. And inform that person that I will hold them personally responsible for any damage. But I don't really want to get into a war.
Well, exactly, and then that's really what's happening here. So one of the things we have to understand is that based on the existing system, we have a set of consequences. Changing that system changes the consequences.
Yeah.
So it has to demand a change in approach. So, in the past, you could just shall we say, run away, and live far away from the rest of civilization, if you will. And many have done that. But, today is becoming more and more difficult to do that if you're wanting to, work in that environment. So I can, it may not be a proper analogy, but I think it's indicative of the situation. My analogy is we went into the grocery store. And I think you all know that in the grocery store, the outer perimeter is where all the good stuff is, and in the center of the grocery store, all
Yes.
the aisles is
Right.
all the stuff that they advertise heavily. And the reason they advertise it heavily is because they
It's no
need,
good.
yeah, and they tell you how good it is. And it is good.
Yeah.
It is good for their profit line and for their welfare. But
Mm.
they are assuming that you agree with it, and then you do. And the point of the matter is that when you come into that grocery store, and we were so health conscious, and we were looking at all the goods, whether they were in the center or in the perimeter, and we said, you know what, we cannot eat well on this planet. We do not have enough money to eat well on this planet. We do not have choices. If we're going to buy from a grocery store or even a farmer, in many cases, what we get is what we get, and we're lucky to get it. But what was explained to me, and I didn't understand it at the time because this was over 30 years ago. The nutrition that we get from whatever we eat is also based on what we seek and what we don't allow, what we repel. So we can actually shield ourselves from the harmful effects and allow the passing through of the beneficial effects. And so as the systems are becoming more, shall we say, invasive and more powerful and working on our weaknesses, which is the emotional field strength of our physicality, we need to shield ourselves better. So there are two ways to do that. One is in that physicality where we create a plasma shield. That's part of the peace dome. And the second way is to do that in our field strength of our emotion and our understanding and the knowledge to understand that our soul is full of good intentions, because not only is it our friend, it's us. And so if we rely on that and open ourselves up to the possibility, then we can increase that field strength. And that field strength is operating at orders of magnitude stronger than the field strength of these invasive energies.
Yeah. But what about my tenants? I ordered that, what was that? The home energy enhancement unit, one for each apartment, hasn't come yet. So,
Well, we understand that it's not an individual problem. This is a universal problem for
right.
the inhabitants on this planet, because there are those who have, throttled the whole process.
Yeah.
And the reason they have done that is because they're clinging to power. And so that viewpoint that they're trying to impose on us is their viewpoint, and they scare us with these the thoughts of harm, and these are impacting us negatively. So we literally have to be aware, and that will empower us to be more resistant. So it becomes I won't say just a chess match, although that may be appropriate in this case, because one of the things about chess is that the intention is to kill, but the Keshe Foundation has put forward in the store a chess match which allows us to view the whole thing differently. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to elevate our methodologies to be able to deal with this. And it isn't just what we're doing, but as you asked, you talked about your tenants. Well, they too have to become aware, and they will become aware. Well, I'm not saying that it's easy. We do need supplementation, and that's where we're coming in, and we're coming to that conclusion very, very quickly, because 6 weeks ago, I think the One Nation Network has been initiated, and that is the plasma science overriding the nuclear science, and the nuclear science obviously overrides the, how shall we call it, the electrical science. And that's what these meters are registering, the transmission of energy. We are transmitting energy on a higher plane. It's beyond the nuclear level. And so we are on the verge of changing that. But the change has to come from two ways. One is through the physical supplementation, and two is from the enhancement of our viewpoint, our soul viewpoint, to understand that we are the sun stars, and the shine in our sun, it comes from within, and that is overpowering. So we just need to practice that, because we have been inundated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with the negative thoughts, shall we say, of the fallen angels, and who make us believe that we are the fallen angels. Well, we are, if we kowtow to their nefarious ways. And when we understand that the essence of humanity is more valuable than money, then we can enlist the services of the higher power, which will help us and guide us. And we will see these manifestations. They will override everything. So, as Mark often says, good thoughts, good deeds, good actions, all works together.
So I should make some star formation configurations and place them in the houses.
Precisely. You have the power.
Thank you for the reminder.
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for your fine service. We need you badly.
Yeah, my sister asked me, how come I'm doing business this way? And I said, I've always done it that way. I mean, not business, but I mean, that's how I lived. I climbed trees and took care of plants. I remember a key experience in my life when I was really little. I was walking on this concrete or this asphalt sidewalk, and there was also bicycle traffic there and so on. And I found a little broken off rosebud. So somebody probably was bringing a bouquet of roses, and it was laying there on the ground, and I picked it up and I took it home and I put it in water, and it opened up for me. It was crooked, but it opened up for me, and that was such a formative experience that shaped the rest of my life.
Well, it just shows you how impactful your external input is. And this is what we were talking to, and then a lot of people look at inertia as just being that, shall we say, carry forward until an external input comes in to alter the speed and direction and everything else. The inertia is the coming together of the overlapping fields, and external input is what changes that inertia. And that input doesn't come it can come at the inertia level, but it can also come at the substrate, the plasma level. And it's a lot easier when it comes at the plasma level.
Yeah, what was, I forgot to say that this little rosebud had been run over and flattened. And
Yeah,
so it was particularly impressive to me that it opened up and it was beautiful. It was crooked, but it was still beautiful.
well, remember when the soldiers leave the field, all the flowers that they trampled on will grow.
Right. Yeah.
So, who has the higher field strength? Those who, flex their physical muscles and their power, or those who are engaged with the universal context.
Mhm.
So you elevated the soul of that little rose and it got to show its beauty.
Right. And I felt I took it personally that it did that for me because I rescued it.
Yes, there are a lot of souls in need, and that's what we do with the Peace Stone and so on and so forth.
And that I had treated all my tenants that way,
Yes.
you know.
But yeah, they're twisting your arm in a way
Who?
with the fine for.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they always said what it's better to have separate utilities when you go to sell, but if you just had one meter, it might have been
Right.
able to handle.
Yeah, I mean, at least they consolidate all the gas meters and all the electric meters to one each instead of multiple. Somebody also, yeah, okay, the star formation. And then somebody told me also if I put a mirror behind all that stuff, it would reflect it out. Someone else told me I should absorb the fields with magnets because when you reflect them, they're still there, you know, still affect somebody else.
Yeah, and a lot of that is so they could automatically read meters. They don't have to physically send
Big
something.
plus,
Yeah.
plus. So, okay. Thank you.
And that's why we're doing the One Nation Network to have, in a way, a different type of system. As he said, we won't need the power and we won't need the Wi-Fi. So perhaps we won't need water as well. We can create the water on demand, just the way he's talking about the virus application, the energy pack, and the rest, the feeding, and so on.
So, Mark, you see the forcefulness of their imposition of these new rules. It just shows you how desperate they are.
Of course.
And, you know, that's already showing a sign of weakness. We have been seeking a graceful transition. And, when they start to do these kinds of mandates, they are not making it very graceful. They're not giving us that opportunity. And so they're forcing our hand, which in a way, they're forcing themselves because we're trying to be graceful and they are not allowing a graceful approach. They are insisting at doing it their way, and their way is going to be, very hurtful. So in the end, based on the counterweight, based on the conservation of energy, that will come back to haunt them. So just stay tuned for the next exciting episode, and let's remember that we are all empowered with the power of the universe because we are all products of the sun star inertia fields. Thank you very much for allowing me to continue to present. And Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you and just remain if there's more questions.
Okay, let's just take the screen if we can. Sure, I did that correctly. Yes, I think I did. Okay, any other thoughts or questions? Again, everything seems to be handled quite powerfully in the background, step by step, just asking us to be part of it, reach into your pocket and allow the Keshe Foundation to operate freely. We can see that the technology is beyond even most of our imaginations, and I don't think we've seen anything yet we're just at the beginning of this beautiful new period that we're coming into. And again, a lot of help from external forces, and this will change the emotion, which will change the DNA, and we'll all start to become more peaceful. But as Mr. Kesh said at the end of the last workshop, we may see the change in the next 20 or 30 years, but I think we'll start to feel and be aware of the change as knowledge seekers in a much deeper way as we start to interact with the energy dimension of the One Nation Network. But we'll have to wait and see. As he said, there's a lot to wait and see. Any other thoughts or questions, or I'll play the final disclaimer. Meeting session will come to an end. Again, Alex was mentioning the three wise men. Again, something very easy for you to start to work on, at least become aware of the gift. This is the time of the season where the three wise men gave their gift to the Christ child, but it was a more deeper gift than we understood in the books, the holy books. It was the thinking, speaking, and acting good. And you can apply that and create your own sort of shielding and probably a lot of wellness within your own life. And then, of course, if you can do that and learn about this giving, and automatically you receive just the giving part, then you can be proud of the work you do, and you'll be proud of the person you are, and you'll be proud of the difference you're making. Again, this is a long-term plan rather than something short and quick. So again, apply the ethos of the three wise men if you can. Start to work with it. I think this is probably the area we offend more than many of the other areas, is in our thought world. And of course, that is the dimension of space I think he's talking about. So we can't go out into the universe with the wrong thoughts or the wrong emotions and the wrong behavior. So it's up to us to move in that direction, at least make the wish to, and then we'll see the wish manifest itself. So thank you all. If there's no other comments or questions,